This isn't a romance, Miss Sermakova. It's a deed of necessity. Matt San Miguel didn't look up as he slid the marriage certificate across the scarred oak table. You get a roof and protection from whoever you're running from. I get to satisfy my grandfather's will and keep my family's mountain. We stay out of each other's way. Nancy picked up the pen, her hands still trembling from the city she'd fled. A cold arrangement for a cold mountain, Mr. San Miguel. I accept. She expected a frozen purgatory. She didn't know the mountain man was about to set her soul ablaze. The drive up the winding, treacherous pass of the Bitterroot Range felt less like a journey and more like a descent into exile. Nancy Sermakova gripped the fraying handle above the passenger window of Leon Knudsen's rusted pickup truck. Leon, a weathered local who ran the valley's supply lines with a morally flexible compass, had picked her up at the Greyhound station. He chewed on a toothpick, side-eyeing the delicate silk of Nancy's scarf, the last remnant of a life that no longer existed. "Matt's ain't one for talking, miss," Leon had warned her as the truck tires crunched over black ice. "He's a ghost who happens to chop wood. Don't expect no warm welcome." Nancy hadn't expected one. 6 months ago, she was the heiress to the Sermakova shipping fortune, planning a lavish spring wedding. Then came Zbynek Weber. Zbynek, a ruthless venture capitalist with a smile like a razor blade, had engineered a hostile takeover that not only bankrupted her father but drove the old man to an early grave. Stripped of her wealth, her reputation destroyed by fabricated scandals planted by Zbynek's new fiancée, Nancy's former best friend, Isis Warren. Nancy had been left with nothing. When she saw the cryptic ad in a drifter's newspaper, wanted wife of convenience, remote location, room, board, and absolute anonymity provided in exchange for legal marriage status. No questions asked. She hadn't hesitated. She needed to disappear. When Leon's truck finally groaned to a halt, the cabin loomed before her. It was a massive, hand-hewn structure of dark timber, crouched beneath the towering, snow-laden pines like a sleeping beast. And standing on the porch was Matt San Miguel. He was a mountain of a man, clad in a heavy flannel jacket and dark denim, his face obscured by a thick, dark beard and eyes the color of a winter storm. He didn't smile as she stepped out into the biting wind. He simply nodded at Leon, grabbed Nancy's single, battered suitcase, and walked inside. The first few weeks were a masterclass in silent endurance. The cabin, though vast, felt suffocating in its quiet. Matt's was a phantom in his own home. He left before dawn to check trap lines, mend fences, and secure the vast acreage he owned, returning only when the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. Dinner was a silent affair of venison stew and root vegetables. Nancy, determined not to be a burden, forced herself to adapt. Her manicured hands blistered as she learned to split kindling. Her silk clothes were traded for rough wool from the town store. She built walls around her heart, matching Mats's icy demeanor with her own frozen resolve. She convinced herself this was merely a transaction. He was a brute carved from stone, and she was a hollowed-out shell. There was no room for warmth in the Bitterroot. But late at night, as the wind howled like wolves against the glass, Nancy would sometimes catch Matt staring at the fireplace, a look of profound, heavy sorrow etched into his rugged features. He was hiding something, just as she was. And in the oppressive silence of the mountain, secrets have a way of begging to be uncovered. The shift didn't happen in a moment of dramatic revelation. It began with the wrath of nature. In late November, a freak blizzard, the likes of which the locals hadn't seen in decades, slammed into the ridge. The sky bruised purple, then collapsed into an impenetrable sheet of white. Mats had been out trying to secure the barn roof when a massive pine bough, heavy with ice, snapped. Nancy was inside, boiling water on the cast-iron stove, when she heard the sickening crack followed by a heavy thud. Panic, unfamiliar and sharp, pierced her chest. She threw on Mats's spare coat and plunged into the whiteout. The cold hit her lungs like swallowed glass. She found him pinned beneath a thick branch, blood mixing with the snow near his temple, his leg trapped. "Mats!" she screamed, the wind tearing the sound from her throat. He was semi-conscious, his jaw clenched in agony. "Get inside," he grunted. "Too cold. Shut up and help me lift." Nancy roared back, a primal fire igniting in her belly. For the next 10 minutes, the disgraced socialite fought the mountain. She used a split log as a fulcrum, her muscles screaming, her hands tearing open against the rough bark. With a guttural cry, she leveraged the branch just enough for Mats to drag his leg free. By the time she half-carried, half-dragged his massive frame into the cabin. They were both shivering violently. The power lines were down. The world outside had ceased to exist. For 3 days, the storm raged, trapping them in the dim light of the hearth. Mats's leg was badly bruised, his fever spiking from the head wound. Nancy didn't sleep. She became his nurse, his caretaker, his lifeline. She packed his wounds with snow melted over the fire, forced bitter willowbark tea down his throat, and sat by his side, wiping the sweat from his brow. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Mats opened his eyes, the storm-grey irises clear for the first time. He looked at Nancy, curled in a chair beside him, her face smudged with soot, dark circles under her eyes, her hands wrapped in crude bandages. "You didn't leave," he rasped, his voice raw. "Where would I go?" she replied softly, offering him a tin cup of water. He took it, his large fingers brushing against hers. A spark, startling and warm, leaped between them. "Most people would have let the mountain take me. You're not glass, are you, Nancy?" "I used to be," she whispered, looking down at her calloused hands. "But glass shatters. I'm learning to be iron." Over the next week, as the snow outside settled, the ice inside began to thaw. The silence was replaced by hesitant conversations. Mats revealed the truth of his isolation. He wasn't born a mountain man. He had been an investigative journalist in Chicago. He'd uncovered a massive corruption ring, but the people involved had silenced him, threatening his life and destroying his career. He retreated to the land his grandfather left him, hiding from a world that rewarded cruelty. Nancy, in turn, told him of Zebinek and the betrayal that broke her father. She cried for the first time in a year, and Mats did something she never expected. The rugged giant reached out, pulling her against his chest, wrapping his massive arms around her. He smelled of pine, wood smoke, and safety. "They broke us both," Mats murmured into her hair. "But they didn't finish the job. You are safe here. I swear it on my life." That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. The transaction was over. In the warmth of the firelight, 2 broken people found the pieces of themselves in each other, their marriage of convenience dissolving into a fiercely guarded, slow-burning devotion. Spring arrived in the valley with a violent burst of color, melting the snow and turning the treacherous mountain roads into rivers of thick, dark mud. By April, Nancy and Mats were no longer strangers sharing a roof. They were partners in every sense of the word. She managed the ledger, carefully planning their spring garden, while he hunted and negotiated timber sales. The tentative touches that had begun in the dead of winter had blossomed into long, passionate nights. Their souls were knitting together in the secluded safety of the Bitterroot, building a fortress of quiet happiness. But safety is a fragile illusion when the ghosts of the past are left unresolved. On a bright Tuesday, they rode down to the valley town to resupply at Leon Knudsen's store and finalize a deed renewal with the county clerk, Eva Pike. The drive down was filled with easy silence and the warmth of Mats's hand resting over hers on the truck's bench seat. The town of Oakhaven was a small, dusty speck, usually completely devoid of outsiders. But as Mats parked the muddy pickup near the feed store, Nancy's blood turned to ice. Parked outside the modest local diner was a sleek, black Mercedes SUV, a predatory machine entirely out of place among the rusted tractors and battered logging trucks. "What is it?" Mats asked instantly, his protective instincts flaring as he caught the sheer terror dilating her pupils. Before she could form the words, the brass bell above the diner door chimed. Out stepped Zbynek Weber, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal topcoat, a smug, arrogant smirk plastered on his face. Clinging to his arm, wearing pristine designer boots that looked ridiculous against the muddy boardwalk, was Isis Warren. Nancy froze. The nightmare she had run 3,000 miles to escape was suddenly standing 20 feet away. Zbynek was in Oakhaven scouting. His massive conglomerate had realized the Bitterroot Range was sitting on one of the largest untapped geothermal aquifers in the state. He was quietly buying up the valley piece by piece to build a luxury wellness resort for billionaires. But to control the ecosystem, he needed the high-ground water rights that belonged exclusively to Mats San Miguel. Isis spotted her first. She paused, pulling down her oversized designer sunglasses, her eyes widening in disbelief before narrowing into a venomous, delighted squint. "Nancy, my God. Nancy Sermakova, is that you?" Isis's voice dripped with fake, saccharine pity, projected loudly enough for the locals on the porch to hear. She let go of Zabinek's arm and took a step closer, looking Nancy up and down the faded flannel shirt, the worn denim, the hair pulled back in a simple braid. "Look at you, you look like a peasant. I heard you went completely crazy and disappeared after your father's little financial failure. Is this mud on your face your new aesthetic?" Zabinek chuckled, adjusting his expensive cuffs. He recognized her, and the cruelty in his eyes sharpened. Well, the runaway heiress hiding in the dirt. Tell me, Nancy, who are you clinging to for scraps now? Your father couldn't handle the real world, and it looks like you couldn't either. Nancy felt her throat close, the old, suffocating shame threatening to drown her. The memories of her father's despair rushed back, paralyzing her. But before she could take a step back in retreat, a large, calloused hand wrapped firmly around hers, grounding her instantly in the present. Matt stepped forward, effortlessly positioning his massive frame slightly in front of Nancy, shielding her. He didn't yell, he didn't posture. He simply radiated a quiet, lethal menace that made the air around him feel heavy, causing Zbinek's smirk to falter slightly. "She's not clinging to anyone," Matt said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that seemed to vibrate in the wooden floorboards of the porch. "She's my wife, and you're trespassing on our oxygen. I suggest you close your mouth before you swallow a bug." Zbigniew recovered his arrogance quickly, masking his physical intimidation with corporate bravado. "Ah, the famous holdout. Mr. San Miguel, I was actually coming to see you today. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000 for your miserable pile of rocks up there. The geothermal vents beneath your cabin are standing in the way of progress. Take the check, and you can buy your wife something nicer than rags, or she can crawl back to the gutter where she belongs." "My land isn't for sale," Mats replied smoothly, his eyes deadlocked on Zbigniew. "Not to you, not ever. Get back in your car and leave my town." "Your town?" Zbigniew laughed, though the sound was hollow and strained. He stepped closer, attempting to use his own height, but Matt still dwarfed him considerably. "I'm bringing millions here. I'm bringing civilization. You can't stop me, mountain man. I break people for a living. I crush them until there's nothing left. Just ask your wife's dead father." The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. Mats moved with a speed that defied his massive size. He lunged, grabbing Zbigniew by the lapels of his $1,000 coat, lifting him off his twos, and slamming him brutally against the wooden siding of the diner. The thud echoed sharply down the main street, silencing the few birds in the trees. Deputy Yukas Brodin, a local cop whose loyalties had already been bought by Zbiniew's scouting team, started to reach nervously for his belt. But from the shadows of the feed store, Leon Knudsen materialized, casually resting a heavy, rusted crowbar against his shoulder, shaking his head slowly at the deputy. Brodin froze. "I don't care about your millions," Mats whispered, his face inches from Zbiniew's terrified, wide eyes. "If you ever speak of her father again, if you ever look at her again, I will bury you so deep in this mountain they won't even find your shadow. Do we understand each other?" Mats opened his hands, letting Zbigniew drop unceremoniously into the mud. Zbigniew stumbled, gasping for air, while Isis shrieked in horror, trying to wipe the dirt from his coat. Mats didn't spare them another glance. He took Nancy's hand, his grip gentle once more, and walked her away, leaving the arrogant billionaire trembling and humiliated in the dust. The line had been drawn. The war had officially begun. Zbigniew Weber was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who burned the entire board when he couldn't win the game. Humiliated in front of the town and his fiancée, Zbigniew unleashed the full, terrifying weight of his corporate malice upon the San Miguel land. He wanted Mats broken, and he wanted Nancy to watch. The retaliation was swift, calculated, and brutal. Within a week, the main access road leading up to Mats's property was mysteriously barricaded by heavy construction equipment. A team of private security contractors in unmarked uniforms set up a checkpoint, denying entry or exit. Next, local suppliers in the next county over suddenly refused to deliver animal feed, diesel fuel for their generator, or vital supplies, vaguely citing unforeseen legal complications. When Mats drove his truck down to confront the blockade, Deputy Brodin drove up, offering zero assistance. The corrupt cop leaned against his cruiser and smirked, claiming the road disputes were civil matters and that Mats would be arrested for assault if he touched the contractors. They were laying siege. They were trying to starve Mats out of his own home. Inside the cabin, as the days turned into weeks, the tension became a physical weight. The generator was running low on diesel, forcing them to rely entirely on oil lamps and the hearth. Nancy paced the wooden floorboards, watching the mountain she had come to love turn into a prison. The guilt was a gnawing, agonizing beast in her stomach. "It's me," she said one evening, her voice cracking as she watched Mats methodically clean and oil his hunting rifle by the firelight. "He's doing this because of me, Mats. He wants the land. Yes, but he wants to punish me. He wants to prove he can take everything I love. If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't brought this darkness to your door, he might have just offered you the money and eventually left you alone." Mats stopped what he was doing. He set the rifle down on the table with a heavy thud. The firelight danced across his rugged face, highlighting not anger, but a fierce, immovable determination. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, catching her as she turned away, and took her face in his large, warm hands, forcing her to look at him. "Stop it," he commanded, his voice a gentle rumble. "Look at me, Nancy." He waited until her tear-filled, wide eyes met his steady gaze. "They took my career and my voice in Chicago. They took your family and your name, but they are absolutely not taking our home. You didn't bring darkness here. You brought me back to life. Before you walked onto this porch, I was just a ghost haunting these woods, waiting to fade away. You are the fire in this hearth. I will fight 100 Zebeneks before I let him chase you away again. This is our mountain, and we are going to defend it." The raw, unfiltered devotion in his voice shattered the last remnants of Nancy's fear. The fragile socialite who had run away from the city was completely gone. In her place stood a woman forged in the crucible of the bitter cold. She reached up, grabbing the collar of his flannel shirt, and pulled him down into a desperate, searing kiss. It was a kiss born of pure survival, of shared defiance, of profound and terrifying love. All the unspoken words, the lingering glances, the shared hardships of the brutal winter culminated in a wild, unbridled passion. They crashed onto the thick rug before the roaring fire, clothes torn away in the urgency of the moment, seeking solace and strength in each other's warmth. The physical connection was a wildfire, burning away the remnants of their past traumas, branding them entirely to one another. In the shadow of a looming corporate war that sought to destroy them, they claimed each other completely, their bodies making a vow far more sacred and binding than the piece of paper they had signed months ago. The next morning, Nancy awoke wrapped tightly in Mats's arms, the heavy quilt pulled over them to ward off the morning chill. She felt a profound, unshakable strength in her bones. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a fighter. "We fight back," Nancy whispered into his chest, her fingers tracing the scars on his shoulder. "We don't wait for them to starve us out. What do we do?" Matt smiled, a dangerous, razor-sharp expression that transformed him from a rugged woodsman back into the man who had terrified corrupt politicians. "I told you I was a forensic journalist, Nancy. Zebenek thinks I'm just a dumb lumberjack with a temper. He doesn't know that 3 days ago, Leon smuggled a military-grade satellite uplink into the bags of chicken feed." Nancy sat up, the quilt falling away, her eyes wide with shock. You what?" Matt stood up, pulling on his jeans, walking over to a heavy tarp in the corner of the room that Nancy had assumed was covering winter gear. He pulled it back to reveal a glowing laptop wired into a complex array of hardware. "Zebenek is incredibly arrogant, which means he's sloppy. He's over-leveraged. He's using a network of shell companies in the Caymans to illegally bribe state officials for these zoning permits, including Deputy Brodin. I've spent the last 4 nights hacking into his holding company's unencrypted backup servers." Matt's turned to her, the mountain man entirely replaced by a lethal investigator. "I have the digital paper trail, every wire transfer, every illegal land grab, every bribe. He wants a war for this mountain, Nancy. Let's give him a damn avalanche." Zebenek Weber believed he had dealt the killing blow. Impatient with the blockade and frustrated by Mats's stubborn survival, Zebenek had decided to accelerate the timeline. Using his vast wealth, he had paid off a sleazy, compromised county judge in a neighboring jurisdiction to validate a fabricated lien against the San Miguel property. The fake document tied a supposed massive unpaid debt of Nancy's late father directly to Nancy herself, claiming that her legal marriage to Mats made his physical assets liable for the default. It was highly illegal, a paper-thin legal ruse that wouldn't hold up in a higher court. But Zebenek knew that in small, isolated towns, Corporate money and a corrupt badge moved faster than the actual law. He planned to evict them, bulldoze the cabin, and start drilling before anyone could file an appeal. On a stormy Tuesday afternoon, the sky bruised a violent, churning grey. The rumble of heavy engines cut through the sound of thunder. A convoy of black SUVs tore up the muddy mountain road, having casually bulldozed the makeshift wooden gate Mats had erected near the property line. Zibinek, looking triumphant and cruel in a custom black raincoat, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was flanked by Deputy Brodin, who had his hand resting eagerly on his holster, and a slick-haired corporate lawyer clutching a waterproof briefcase. Isis remained in the plush interior of the Mercedes, filing her nails, looking utterly bored with the destruction she was helping orchestrate. Mats and Nancy stood side by side on the covered porch. Nancy held a steaming mug of coffee in both hands, her posture relaxed, her face completely unfazed by the small army assembling in her front yard. Mats stood beside her, leaning casually against a wooden support pillar, his thumbs hooked loosely in his belt loops. He didn't reach for a rifle, he just watched them approach. Eviction day, San Miguel, Zbynek gloated, his voice carrying over the rising wind as he waved a thick manila folder in the air. Foreclosure based on outstanding familial debt. It's a real shame you married a financial liability. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever rags you can carry and vacate the premises before Deputy Brodin here arrests you both for trespassing on my new resort property. Brodin puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intimidate them. You heard the man, Mats. The judge signed the order. Don't make this hard on yourselves. I'd hate to have to use force on a woman. Nancy took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, her eyes locking onto Zibinek over the rim of the mug. You forged a debt from a dead man to steal a mountain. Zibinek, are you really that desperate? Is the conglomerate failing that badly? Zibinek sneered, his face flushing with anger at her insolence. I'm not desperate, sweetheart. I'm inevitable. I own this valley. The law is whatever I pay for it to be. Now pack your trush and get off my mountain before I have my men drag you off by your hair. Mats chuckled. It was a deep, resonant sound that echoed off the pines, profoundly unsettling. It wasn't the reaction of a defeated man. You know, Zibinek, Mats said, slowly walking down the porch steps, the rain beginning to slick his dark hair. You're right about one thing. The local law can absolutely be bought. Men like Brodin come cheap. Mats stopped a few feet from Zibinek, a predatory smile touching his lips. But the Federal Bureau of Investigation? They're a little harder to price out. Zibinek's smirk faltered, his brow furrowing in sudden confusion. What the hell are you talking about? Just then, a new sound drowned out the storm. It wasn't more of Zibinek's private security. Grinding up the muddy, treacherous mountain road was a massive fleet of unmarked, dark sedans, their red and blue grille lights flashing through the gloom, followed closely by half a dozen state police cruisers. They swarmed the clearing, boxing in Zibinek's SUVs completely. Leon Knudsen stepped out of the lead vehicle, grinning from ear to ear around his toothpick. He was accompanied by Ivor Pike, the honest county clerk clutching a stack of authentic county records, and 3 men wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow FBI insignias on the back. What is the meaning of this? Zibinek demanded, his voice pitching higher in sudden, uncontrolled panic. He spun around as state troopers began pouring out of their cruisers. The meaning, Mats said, his voice turning from a casual drawl to cold, hard steel, is that while you were busy paying off a judge to forge eviction documents, I used a satellite uplink to forward a 40-page, encrypted dossier to the United States District Attorney's Office. It details your offshore accounts in the Caymans, your wire fraud across state lines, and crystal-clear audio recordings of your bribes to Deputy Brodin. Mats reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, silver flash drive, and casually tossed it into the mud directly at Zibinek's expensive Italian shoes. You ruined her father with illegal short-selling, and you thought you could try to steal my land using federal wire fraud. Mats stepped closer, towering over the billionaire. You made a massive miscalculation. You didn't corner a dumb mountain man, Zbynek. You cornered a forensic auditor who knows exactly how to read your cooked books. Zibinek's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. He looked frantically at his corporate lawyer, but the slick-haired man was already backing away, his hands raised in the air in total surrender to the approaching federal agents. He looked at Brodin, who was suddenly looking very pale and sweaty, as 2 state police officers approached him, their hands on their cuffs. This is a lie, This is a setup. I have money. I have power, Zibinek screamed, his voice cracking as his arrogant veneer shattered into a million pieces. You have nothing, Nancy said, stepping off the porch to stand firmly beside her husband, her voice ringing out clear and strong over the rain. Because you are nothing but a thief, and this mountain doesn't suffer thieves. The takedown of Zibinek Weber was a spectacle of hard, unforgiving karma. The feds didn't just arrest him. They dismantled him. As the federal agents read Zibinek his rights and slammed him against the hood of his own Mercedes to cuff him, Isis Warren burst from the car. The manipulative socialite was crying genuine tears of panic. Wait, I didn't know anything about this. I'm just his fiancée, Isis pleaded, looking desperately at the agents. I'm a victim here. Zibinek, his face pressed against the cold metal, snarled. Shut up, Isis. You helped forge the bank statements in Chicago. Tell them. Isis recoiled in horror as an agent firmly grasped her arm. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit fraud. As they were being led away, Isis locked eyes with Nancy. All the haughty superiority was gone, replaced by absolute terror. Nancy, please, Isis whimpered. We used to be friends. Please tell them I'm innocent. I have nowhere to go. My accounts are tied to his. Nancy looked at the woman who had helped destroy her family, who had mocked her dead father, who had tried to steal the only sanctuary she had left. Nancy's eyes were calm, devoid of anger, reflecting only the cold, hard truth of the mountain. I don't know you, Nancy said softly. And winter is coming. You should have learned how to build a fire. Isis sobbed as she was pushed into the back of a police cruiser. The town of Oakhaven watched in stunned silence as the convoy of corrupt wealth was driven back down the mountain, destined for federal prison. Deputy Brodin was stripped of his badge on the spot and arrested by the state police. Later that evening, the mountain was quiet again. The barricades were gone. The threat was erased. Zibinek's assets were frozen, and the land he had illegally acquired in the valley was slated to be returned to the town, orchestrated by Eva Pike and Leon Knudsen, who had suddenly become a hero for providing the state with Brodin's bribery tapes. Nancy and Matt stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. The air was crisp, clean, and entirely theirs. Matt wrapped his thick arms around Nancy from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension of the past few months finally leaving his body. So, Matt murmured, his voice rumbling against her back. The contract said this was a marriage of convenience, a deed of necessity. I suppose, since the threat is gone, the contract is fulfilled. Nancy turned in his arms, wrapping her hands behind his neck. She looked up into the storm-grey eyes that had become her favorite view in the world. The contract was void the moment you pulled me from the storm, she whispered, rising onto her tiptoes. I'm not going anywhere, mountain man. You're stuck with me, Matt smiled, a true, radiant smile that reached his eyes and transformed his rugged face. Good, he said, pulling her flush against him, because the only thing colder than this mountain would be living on it without you. He kissed her as the last light faded, the embers in the hearth inside glowing bright, a permanent fire against the dark. And so, the cold marriage of convenience became the warmest, most unbreakable bond the Bitterroot Range had ever seen. Nancy traded her hollow life of high society glass for a foundation of iron, while Mats found the fire he needed to finally heal his frozen heart. Meanwhile, Zibinek and Isis learned the hard way that arrogance and greed are no match for the brutal, unforgiving justice of karma. If this story of finding true warmth in the coldest of places and watching arrogant enemies get exactly what they deserve moved you today, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true wealth isn't in a bank account, it's in the people who stand by you during the storm. Don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, emotional stories of love, karma, and redemption. Remember, in real life, the most beautiful fires often start in the darkest places. Keep your heart open, stand your ground, and let karma handle the rest. See you in the next story.